And the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn. So I'm going to share some slides, but we're intending for this to be pretty conversational, and we really, really welcome anybody who wants to chime in on chat, and we'll have space and time for you to share your ideas as well. So we're going to be talking about examples of persuading or trying to persuade faculty to adopt OER. And my name's Matthea. I'm the Assistant Dean for Online Education at Columbia University School of Social Work, and I will turn it over to Beth to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Councilman Carpenter, and I'm an Associate Professor of Social Work at Adelphi University.
And I'm Stephen Cummings, and I am the MSW Program Director and the Distance Education Administrator for the University of Iowa School of Social Work. You see my Twitter handle there. Actually, I should probably change that because I'm over probably on Threads more, but that's a different story. But you can still find me on Twitter or whatever we call it now.
Thank you. So what's in this session for you? We will be sharing some examples of how we've worked on persuading faculty to develop OER or to adopt OER, and then talk about challenges and lessons learned. And then also we're hoping that everyone can share your ideas and strategies for advancing the cause of open education with faculty and department chairs and administrators. So we hope that you'll be sharing your ideas, asking questions, and adding to your toolkits. For our agenda, we're going to do a little bit of a warm-up, then just quickly talk about some persuasive points we've been using for OER, some arguments that faculty make against OER, and then throughout we'll be sharing our experiences, but we also want to make sure there's time for you all to share your experiences too. And then we'll share a couple resources and do some Q&A and wrap up. So just to warm us up here, could you let us know in the chat, what word would you use to describe what it's like to ask faculty to change something about their teaching? And also, if you care to share what motivated you to choose the session today.
Rolling teeth.
Uphill, yep.
Climbing Mount Everest. Flip-flops. Flip-flops. Appreciate that. Motivation, yeah. Sales pitch.
Mm-hmm.
Agree. Options.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, Michael. Love it. Scary.
Mm-hmm. And focus, yeah, I mean, we're a faculty too. all of us are faculty here, Stephen and Beth and I, so we definitely don't want to dump on faculty. And I know that anytime I want to make any kind of change in my life, it is a big deal. A big deal. I mean, even just remembering to take vitamin D or something, like something as small as that, is a big deal. So, yes,
absolutely.
It is
intimidating.
Yep. All right, well, thanks for sharing, and please do continue to share in the chat too. Oh, Christine, that's great. Thank you. New ways to persuade faculty and know more about their perspectives so you can speak to them. All right, so in this session, please feel free to chat throughout. I know sometimes people are worried that it's rude or something, but we don't think it's rude at all. We love it. And we're happy to answer questions as we go, and also love to hear your ideas too. So a couple persuasive points that I know I personally use when I'm trying to convince faculty to adopt OER resources. And by OER, I really mean anything that students can access for free. So even things that are not necessarily open education resources, but we have them in our library as ebooks or e-resources that students can access for free. I'm kind of lumping that in together when I talk about OER with faculty. So one argument that I try to make is the equity and access argument, which is that really there are many students who can't afford to purchase textbooks, and the cost of textbooks can impact students' life decisions, their ability to travel to see their families, their medical care, their meals, their basic needs. So that's an angle that I'll go with sometimes. And then also reducing barriers to learning. So there's research, and I'll show on the next slide the citations, that says that students just don't buy textbooks. So if there's a course that requires students to purchase textbooks, about 40% of the students aren't going to do it. So then the course is designed in such a way that not all the students in the room can even do the work. So these are the citations I mentioned. If you're looking for Christine, for example, like an article that might persuade faculty, there's health impacts. The survey that examines the impact of textbook prices talks about how many students just don't do it. So they'll take a whole class and never have bought the textbook or never even looked at a textbook. And I find the Columbia Spectator article, which was written by an undergraduate student, particularly compelling if you want to share a story or a narrative. And then there are some studies out there also about students' basic needs and security. And I know SUNY is really fantastic at having food banks for students and trying to address students' basic needs. So that might be something compelling for SUNY folks in particular.
The other great point before we get into the arguments too around access is around time as a resource. Many of our students are caregiving both children and elders. We have 5 campuses, and sometimes students, if they have classes in different, from Brooklyn to Long Island, can be a 2 to 3 hour commute. So having access to not only digitally based like e-blogs, but also blogs, articles, ebooks, etc., allow for students to maximize their commuting time, which I think is really important because we also know that students don't always have the time to do the reading that we're asking them to.
Yeah. It's an excellent point. I'll throw in really quickly as well that I think all of us are engaged in some level of online programming and course design. So those students, typically what I'm hearing from my own program is that those students are in the online program for the very reasons that Beth just laid out. They're managing different aspects of their lives. And so one of the things that we can contribute to that is to provide a way for all of this information, this material that's so relevant to the courses they're taking. How can we make that more portable? How can we make that so that they are able to move around? I'm going to quickly plug an article that Matthea and I just had published this morning that isn't in the slides that gets to this. And so this feels a little self-serving, but it really does talk about how we reduce costs for students, and this is another way we do it. So it's in the link. You can click on that as well just to get a little more insight into what we are doing to respond to students who are telling us, this is a really expensive part of my life and I have limited amount of time, but we're still serving those students.
Thank you. These are really great points. And I hope folks will chime in the chat too, if you've got points that come to mind as you go along or points that you've tried. Oh, Focus, great question. Mm-hmm. Do the libraries offer printed versions for students who may not have digital access? It depends on the resource. Beth, I know you've talked with your open ed or your OER librarian. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. So we are incredibly lucky to have a librarian who is dedicated exclusively to OERs, both for students and for faculty. So he's available as a mentor to help faculty publish in OERs and create OER resources, in addition to helping students find and access OERs. And he was hired just for that purpose. And our provost's office does listen to him. So having been at other institutions where that hasn't been as available, I do know that that's a huge privilege. The initial push is to have an OER where there is also some sort of hard copy access. Now that may mean for some students having a librarian print it out for them, which is a service we do offer, but it isn't available for not every ebook comes in a hard copy. And just to sort of piggyback on what Matthea said about, I also do assign things like blogs and free podcasts, things that are not behind a paywall that share relevant, information related to the course objectives, right? That I've personally vetted, and typically our Faculty Center on Professional Excellence has also vetted. But not all of that comes in hard copy. We try to make sure if it's an auditory resource that there is a transcript, but typically those would have to be printed out.
And just to add to that, this is a great question. Thank you so much for it. And I'll just add that from a perspective of also promoting the programs, or however we communicate to students, this is what the program is. The use of OER should definitely be in the language of those promotional materials, just so that there's an anticipation of the fact that we offer this, and there'll be some expectation for it. But also then speaking to what the technology may be if you want to access those things. And it can be difficult, but we do want to make sure that we're being completely transparent in the use of OER. Yeah, and I'll add, Michael, that we have a student. I've had the same students, not this same student, but I've had students comment that they anticipated a hard copy. They would like a hard copy, and this is where I'm coming from with where are we striking our balance for students who are also feeling the sticker shock of textbooks that cost 100, 150, maybe more. That's an issue for them. Sometimes what we'll do is I'll just sort of briefly encapsulate that our university also has a service, much like what Beth described, where students can access printed material. But for our online students, they really don't have access to a library anywhere close. So this is another thing that we're sort of trying to face when it comes to preparing our courses and designing them to deliver to students in the online environment.
Thank you, Steve, for the shout out for online students in particular, because it is, we have students in California and they can't drive to New York to come to the library. And so in terms of access, we try to make it as easy as possible for them to have a digital version in the library if it's not an open resource. And with digital copies or digital licenses for libraries, we also look at sometimes publishers only allow a certain number of students to look at a digital copy of a library book. It might be one student at a time even sometimes. So that's also a consideration, because sometimes you can get multiple licenses so multiple students can look at the same book, but other times it's just not available, and that's something on the publisher side. So for textbooks like that, it is, even if there's a digital copy available, it's still limited. And if it's possible to find a completely open resource, that would be easier for students.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Matthea, I actually just learned this last week. We have an external resource called Reading List. I don't know if anyone else in this space uses Reading List. It's a service provided by the library that allows faculty to put all of their course readings in one place. It's an external tool, and students use that. It's almost like a digital syllabus, but only focused on the readings. And our library really loves it. In contrast, our tech department really doesn't love it. So there's a lot of debate about the reading list. But one of the things we found for faculty who have adopted the reading list is it miscounts the students who are accessing readings and miscounts the maximization that students have for some of those textbooks. And we haven't figured out a way around it yet. It's a quirk of Reading List and how Reading List talks to our digital subscription service. But the advice I can offer is develop a really great relationship with the librarian or librarians in your particular field of teaching, so that you can figure out ways in which subscriptions and the number of students accessing resources is counted to maximize and to choose sources that allow for maximization of those chapters, articles, or the whole book itself, particularly if you teach in an online program.
Thank you. And Beth, to build off your point about time scarcity also, if possible, we try to have just direct links to readings in our course sites, because the default was to have a link to just the library and then you search the library for the library reserves and then you go to the article, but the article file name might be different from what you thought it was, like maybe the title's not so clear or the authors or something. The file names are labeled so many different things. So then students spend time looking for the readings, even if they're freely available. So that's a time risk that we try to mitigate by putting the exact direct link. All right, so arguments that we've heard faculty make against using OER. I've heard these kind of 4 buckets: academic freedom to make decisions about their own courses, financial aid covering textbook costs, the critical need for one specific textbook that doesn't have a library ebook option, or also the amount of time, going back to time, it does take time to revamp readings on a syllabus, and that can be a barrier for faculty. So Beth and Steve, I don't know if you've heard of different types of arguments or want to chime in about any of these.
The academic freedom one comes up a
Mhm.
lot, and I respect my colleagues' statement on that. I gently push back as a non-tenured faculty that what academic freedom is really, in my sense or my understanding, is not really about whether or not you deliver or design a course a certain way. And I should stress, OER is not mandated in our program. So where we will have faculty that will assign the books that they assign. That is a decision they can make, and it kind of, I should stress, probably gets into the root of one's choices. Although what I will also share is that one thing we hear back from our students' feedback forums consistently is that they feel much more cared for, or a variation of that, when they feel they can find things, and that the in our program is designing courses that are accessible and meaningful to them. So this gets into more than just OER, correct? I mean, this gets into course design, how they find things on their course management system, all of those great things. OER is a piece of that, and we do hear feedback from students that say, it's great that these are resources that I can access. I love the diversity of just-in-time material. So for example, Beth, if you hear a podcast from just last week, you might be able to wrap that into your course in some meaningful way the next week, because, I mean, we teach social work. Social work is a very fluid and ever-changing area of study. So I gently ask our faculty to think about those options, because this is what our students are asking for. This is what we want to provide to them. Yes, and Michael, yes. And I agree, focus, more freedom is accessible through OER.
Yeah, focus, you're kind of tying back into, I think Michael said it earlier about giving instructors choices rather than pushing them. So presenting it as options to do OER. And Michael, I have not heard too much concern over OER quality. So that's an interesting point to raise. Thank you for raising that one.
So I actually am the OER quality piece we're going to address in some of our resources. So our OER librarian offers a rubric for assessing the quality of an OER, any kind of OER resource. So it's the second resource at the end of our slideshow. So I would encourage you to look at that.
Thanks, Beth.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to stop screen sharing to make it a little bit more conversational. And if anyone here wants to be on webcam or mic also, we welcome you. And we're going to share our experiences trying to persuade faculty. So when I'm working with faculty, the primary place where I try to persuade faculty is in our training for potential new instructors. So we package it as being part of accessibility more broadly. So we talk about universal design for learning and designing course assignments that meet multiple modes of expression and multiple modes of presentation. And connected to that, we put in the access piece about textbook costs. We also connect it just broadly when we're talking about inclusive education and accessible education. We'll talk about anti-racist teaching techniques, and we'll also tie it in with kind of the community building, welcoming environment of a classroom. And so we're kind of putting that all together. And in the training, since folks often don't have the syllabus that they're teaching yet, it's helpful to try to sow the seeds of persuasion early for us. So that's where I try to have the most influence. And Michael in Focus, I think that gives that option piece or the freedom piece. I also work with a lot of folks who are new to teaching, and sometimes they'll come in thinking that everything has to be a peer-reviewed journal article. And so they do feel like there is freedom in being able to use podcasts for part of the required readings for the week, or videos that are available on YouTube, or blogs, or that kind of thing, to make it a little bit more broad in what they're realizing that they have the potential to assign.
I think we do the same things at the University of Iowa, at least in our program, where we do provide incentives to new faculty. We don't get a lot of new faculty. We're a smaller program, and but we do have a adjunct pool that we are constantly mentoring and providing support to. We have a formal structure for that. So the OER concept gets introduced there because those folks, for example, have a model of textbook, lecture, class space, and so. And that's not a bad thing. That's the model. And I think that sometimes, going back to this perception that students sometimes have, is that they'll come into the program thinking, okay, textbook, lecture, class time, test, exam. And so it's sort of a surprise when they hear, oh, there's no exam. Not in our programs. We have other types of ways to demonstrate competency. We are very fortunate at the University of Iowa to have an ongoing campaign for offering grant money or grant support for people, for faculty who would like to convert a course that they're teaching, create a new course using OER as elements. Just for example, I have been teaching a course on death and dying issues across the lifespan for a couple of years. It ties back to my practice area. And I applied for a grant so that I could be compensated for the effort to convert that course from its textbook stand to an OER model. I experimented with it just in my last course. I got some good feedback on it, and I was given support for it. So it's exciting for that. And by the way, our library system has an OER expert, a person who is the contact for them, for all of us. We just had a great presentation seminar yesterday about the use of Pressbooks, so that we can adapt Pressbooks using all the things that we have to be aware of, such as citations, making sure that we're using open resources. We go back to this understanding that OER can be anything that makes it free to the student. That does mean, on occasion, copyrighted material. We have to be sensitive to that, because I'd like to be able to go online and find what my colleagues are doing on OER materials, but not all of that is available to the general public, because some of those components are tied to library use and student access and so forth. I think that there's a general push to expand outside of existing copyrighted material so that we can use alternative forms of copyright. So that's an exciting thing too. So anyway, an incentive for us to build those courses over in our institution. And yes, Sophia, I see you have your hand up.
Hi. I work at SUNY Oneonta, and we tend to get a lot of newer faculty who are interested in OER materials, which is really fantastic. Do you have any advice? I know you talked about grants, but for kind of recruiting faculty members who've been there for a while, who are tenure, who kind of aren't very open to these materials.
I can actually speak to that, Sophia. So we found a couple ways of scaffolding it in. One entrance for our most firmly entrenched collegial elders is, in social work, it's called the reaffirmation process, which we go through approximately every 7 years. And recently in social work, we've had to update our EPOS, which are our learning standards. And the change from 2015 to 2022 had a lot of nuances around equity and access for students. So that's something we need to keep our doors open and to be able to keep teaching. So that has been a helpful framework in saying, let's look at the classics and, let's look at their value. Let's look at contemporary voices and let's consider what's going to really get our students to learn. And all of our faculty have to participate in reaffirmation through their sequence committees. And so it gives us a chance every 7 years to really look at what we're doing and if it's meeting student needs. And so even if our more esteemed elders aren't as open, the structure of that reaccreditation is certainly helpful in getting faculty to look. Sometimes we partner junior and senior faculty in a small group, like 3 or 4, to overhaul a syllabus together. So junior faculty don't feel pressured to challenge senior faculty, but senior faculty hear other voices and get some ideas, and the workload is divided, which helps. We try and involve our adjuncts in the process. And, there are some folks who still remain resistant, and we listen, but we also, again, want to get reaccredited so that all of us keep our jobs and can keep teaching. And that's the point we really tie it back to. And for the most part, it's effective. The second piece where we also are trying to scaffold it now is for incoming academics. So we have an established PhD program, and I'm in the process of helping develop a DSW, which is a practice doctorate in social work. And in the PhD program, I developed a course in professional development that helps students learn how to be on the market, learn how to be in conferences, learn how to write articles. And they have a whole class exclusively on paywall, on OERs, how to build a syllabus around it, and how to publish using a Creative Commons license. So we're also hoping to teach the next generation this open-mindedness. So our doc students in both programs should be seasoned to thinking about this as an option in building their syllabi. So we're hoping that, approaching it through reaffirmation and through these new courses, that there will be a more overall willingness to give it a try.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks for sharing about working on a new practice doctorate as well. So it was what you were saying was kind of making me think about, oh no, I just lost it.
I'm trying to find a way to, yeah.
One of the ways in which I think we can also help our colleagues be open to it is by sharing, I think there for a long time was a lot of territorial nature for tenured faculty in particular to feel very protective over their syllabi and not necessarily wanting to be willing to share it. But I think particularly with online programs and regardless of your learning management software, like a general shell that people draw from, if you're a course designer or if you're a designing faculty member, I think showing by example and doing some of the heavy lifting yourself and showing how it ties into the course objectives and into the assignments and making it easy makes it an easier sell. Because all of us like to be able to click on something and open it and make it easy to look at. And reading just peer-reviewed journal articles can be super boring. It's great to look at blogs. And I also think that speaks to citation bias in higher education and the kind of, information we privilege. I do think there should be rigor in looking at the sources we're sharing for our syllabi, but it doesn't always have to be behind a journal with a 2.5 impact factor. So I'm going to send it back to you, Matthea, because you remembered it and I don't want you to forget.
Thanks, Beth. Yep, what you were saying about people love to receive a link that they click on it and it just opens and you don't have to, I don't know, create a new account or download anything to be able to access it. That's something that has been carrying over for any folks who are involved in teaching professional students, because social work's a professional degree, and our students are always very interested in very practical applications. So one practical application of having an open education resource is that our students in social work, they do a field placement or a practicum placement at an internship agency in their first year and in their second year. And one motivation agencies have for hosting students is that students help keep them current on the latest educational information. And when students can share with their practicum supervisor or with their agency materials that they've learned in class, it's helpful if the materials are not behind a paywall. So that's also something that can help motivate instructors a little bit if they're thinking about the wider impact of what they're teaching, going not just to their own students directly, but indirectly to the folks that students are working with.
I'll quickly add, I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'll quickly add that with all this discussion, one thing that I also know with students is that my new students, I've been teaching for 15 years, pardon me, and my current crop are getting insights into the world, social work practice from resources that align with OER, but driven through platforms of like social media. Like we'll talk about TikTok a lot in my class. I'm on TikTok. I don't use it to promote or create content so much as I just want to see what's out there. Some of those TikToks are good, speak to some of the issues and focus areas of social work, and some are not good. And so we weave all of this into, okay, so we're using some of these current platforms. How are we thinking critically about them? You know, TikTok in particular is really about, we gave you something you liked, here's more things you like. And we talk about this in class when we speak, when we spend a lot of time on the nature of critical thinking and how we interpret things. So there is an educational component. It isn't just that anything out there that's not a textbook is good. I am not sending that message at all. But it's the idea of how do we think about all of these resources and how do we think critically about them? Yes, and I would agree, focus, that it's faculty stress is a huge thing, right? The idea that, oh, I have to take this deep textbook that I've used, what do I do about that? And having a point person, if one is available to work with them, is incredibly helpful. I know that's been a very great resource for me.
Absolutely. I think also offering the perspective, it's not necessarily either or. So like I just published a textbook. Textbooks can be great. I also think it's ridiculous that a publisher is going to charge nearly $200 for it. So I can hold both of those truths. It's a yes and so I think other faculty, if they're like, oh, okay, so you're not saying throw all the textbooks out, but here are other ways to make things accessible for students, that it's not sort of this essentialist perspective, can also be helpful in persuading faculty to join and be more open about OERs.
I think it ties back to what folks were saying earlier about giving faculty options, giving students options in how they learn, and what Steve's saying about helping students think critically about the materials they're learning from is really important. So it may be that the faculty member is right. There is one exact perfect textbook, and they know that students are going to carry that textbook forward with them into their careers as well. I recently moved, so I was realizing how many books I held on to from grad school, and had to release some of them out of my very small studio apartment. But that's the critical thinking aspect is just becoming more and more important with social media, and now with the AI generated content as well. So helping students think about that as a learning opportunity is another potential way to persuade faculty about moving into OER.
I have to give I gave one of my students a lot of kudos because we were using a textbook for a course that we have since retired in human behavior. And that textbook was good, but had some concerning use of language that I think had held over from edition to edition. And this is the nature of textbooks. They're multifaceted. They have a lot of support through editors. And she actually wrote the author and said, I think that this is problematic, this language you're using here. And the author responded in kind and said she was, working on a new edition. But that speaks to some of the issues with these textbooks that we do use. Is as good as they are, they're going to be, containing some issues, particularly with the shift and expansion of the use of language. and how we understand the world around us. So it was a learning example for me, because the student didn't even check with me. She's just like, hey, I reached out to this author because I felt like this was something that we needed to be addressed. And she did a good job. So it just highlighted that whole, what about the textbook question that I come up with, especially when I talk to faculty. How do faculty feel about pressure from students? You don't want to alienate faculty. And Michael, are you speaking to students who want more open educational resources and aren't necessarily seeing them?
Yeah, I could go visit the student council and all that, but I'm new here and I'm like holding off because I'm concerned that if I do that, then it may work better if I work from the top down, especially since, as I had typed in earlier, we do offer stipends and things like that for creation and adoption, than if I work from the bottom up and people see me as a troublemaker on campus who's putting, pressure on them to do things that they don't necessarily want.
Yeah, and I think that when you say top down, what I hear you saying, I think, is working with things like perhaps working with identifying who could be great point people and support, and perhaps grant opportunities. All of those are much more positive incentives to bring in or sort of expand the idea that these are doable things. And I mean, I hear you on the student pressure thing, and student pressure can be multifaceted, as you noted. I think you would know, Michael. I think you were the one that noted earlier, or maybe it was somebody else who talked about how some students want that textbook. And look, there are reasons why people want textbooks on paper, that product, because, for example, looking at a screen can be very daunting and challenging over the course of several hours. And so how I think about that is, so what am I designing my course to have students do? So if I'm designing a course that has a lot of reading that can only be accessed through PDFs, what things could I adapt or change so that the course can be more from a simple act of consuming the stuff I'm assigning? What can I do to adapt that? Our course design, I'm getting a little off track here, but I think about how our course designer is always saying the mantra of the course designer is, if you're not going to use it actively in your class, don't assign it. And what I used to do was make an options list, like, this is also fun stuff to read. And then what I heard from students was, well, I feel like I have to read that too, because I feel like all of this is stuff you want us to read. So I actually just posted something on a personal Substack about this, because I just decided, oh, you know what I can do? I'll just create a discussion board in the course and invite students to share what they're experiencing, what they're reading, what they're listening to. And then we can have a conversation about that and weave that critical thinking piece into it.
Also, if I could say one more thing,
yes.
I think some of you, or all three of you, are administrators in your departments. None? So someone's, okay, so Matthea, as administrators, if you're able to make it so that publishing OER textbooks and things like that goes towards tenure, I think you have a certain amount of influence that all librarians would love to see. That's all I can say.
I love all of that. And I think depending on it, I can only speak for my own institution, we're getting there. The idea that you can create product like that then has wide dissemination of work that you're doing or how you understand this gets recognition. I think Iowa, being a R1, is pretty old school in a lot of ways, old school literally. So it is another one of those uphill things, but I see some change. And Beth, it sounds like perhaps you're seeing some of that too, and Matthea, where you are.
One thing also, speaking to our elders are under review. Even tenured full professors are reviewed every 5 years through our tenure, both school-wide and university-wide. And revising a course and revising a syllabus does count towards continued service. So it's a motivation for junior faculty. If they're revising a course and adding more OERs, that counts just as if they were doing an audit and a new textbook. And our senior faculty, who do have to demonstrate in a 5-year period what their service looks like to the school, is another way of getting that done. So that sometimes can be an argument as well. And then in terms of listening to students. One way that we really do this is by, gathering what worked in the semester and what didn't, kind of putting it together in a Google Doc, and that can be shared as an informal student evaluation in your own tenure packet. And if students are consistently saying, this course, for example, our basic human behavior course required 3 textbooks before we revised it. And so we had consistent, and it wasn't in our university course evaluations because that was just multiple choice, but instructors who used kind of an informal, word, how did this class work for you? They said, spending $290 on 3 hard textbooks was really challenging. And we were able to use that to bring it to a vote in faculty to say, let's get this down to 1. So some ways I think informal data can be used over time. It is a slow process. I agree with Stephen, though.
I like the service aspect that you're talking about, Beth, because I think I'm at an R1 also. And Michael, to your point, I don't think we can have OER writing be as much part of a tenure review as we would like, but it's likely not going to count towards publishing for us, but it could potentially count towards service. So, yep, you're saying that too at yours. All
And
right,
that
well,
was that captured it perfectly for our institution as well. There's still an expectation for our tenure track faculty to publish in those high impact journals, but this is a component of the work that they're doing that can be recognized.
I know we're coming on time. We have a couple other resources to share with you, or a couple other slides to share with you. One is this recommended resources slide. And reach out to us for the links. If you'd like a copy of the slides, our contact info is here. We'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn or social media. And we're very happy to share the slides with you. So please do get in touch. We love staying in touch with people. But I also wanted to make sure, did everyone get a chance to ask the questions that you wanted to ask? We're going to keep an eye out on the chat here to see if there's any other questions coming in, or feel free to jump onto mic or webcam. And it would be helpful for us in terms of an informal evaluation of the session if you would be willing to share in the chat what is a key takeaway for you from this session, so that we know what was interesting or valuable or helpful for you. Thank you, Mary. Hey, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we're it's good to reflect on the fact that we're all at kind of these different places and at different roles. Like I mentioned in the chat, I'm not a tenure track faculty. I'm a full-time clinical faculty at where I'm at, and so it does speak differently to the kinds of things that I can dive into personally. And I think that's just a take I have. But one of my tenure track mentors said, "It's great to be a clinical faculty. You can do whatever you want." I'm like, no, within some guardrails, of course. Yeah, Christine, I just want to echo that too. I would like to see it be recognized, and I believe it does. At least where I'm at, the work on OER is recognized. Certainly getting a grant is recognized. I mean, certainly when you get grant money to do something, that's seen as work that you're doing for the benefit of the university.
All right, well, maybe we'll put our LinkedIn's or our emails in the chat so you've got easy access for copy pasting. And Lynn Ann, I think maybe we hand it back over to you.
All right, then. I'm going to end the recording.